My name is Mxiety. I'm a mental health talk show host here on Twitch. And tonight we're talking with Trav Piper, an ex-Mixer streamer, currently Twitch streamer, currently a GTA role-playing streamer. And also, I am as ill-prepared as I possibly can be for this stream.
I am
Meaning,
too.
we didn't do a pre-call. We didn't talk about what we're going to talk about. We're just kind of running and rambling. So I hope it's good. I hope you all enjoy it. I'm going to do my best to make sure that it's enjoyable. And yeah, and we're just going to be talking about a little bit of everything and anything. So Video Game Diva introduced me to you. She literally just said, hey, you have to interview this guy. He has a really, really crazy backstory. And I was like, okay. And then I scheduled an interview with you. And then we never touched base before then to be like, what are we actually going to talk about? So I am you told me you're an open book.
Yeah.
Repeat it. Okay.
I'm open to talk about anything. So.
All right. This is great. Since we did not prepare a topic, we're going to be talking about everything. And I wanted everybody to hear that he said he's an open book. So if I ask something and he's like, oh, not that, y'all know that he said he's an open book first. Okay. I would like a hat like that. Nathaniel, I don't know where you get a hat like that. Tell us where you get that hat. That's the first question.
Metathreads.com, which is actually, yeah, it's like a gaming base, or it's a lifestyle gaming apparel company. But yeah, they have some pretty dope stuff. They do merchandise for streamers. Actually, how I kind of got introduced into the whole streaming world was through that company. But yeah.
Oh, okay. That's like the opposite of that. I learned of Metathreads because of Mixer, but.
Right. Yeah. So it's actually, yeah, it's Metathreads.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Cool. So, give us the quick background. What got you into streaming? And actually, just introduce yourself. Who the hell are you?
Introduce myself. Okay. Yeah. My name's Travis. I'm a streamer. You know, I've been sober for a few years. Came into the game, or I started gaming when I was just a wee lad. You know, I think. Let me see. I was like a musician for a little bit, gave up on my dreams, got a 9-to-5 like everyone should. And then actually, I'm just kidding, but I kind of like re-sparked this kind of like I found a new creative passion, and that was kind of like, I guess, streaming entertainment. And then here I am today, like on Twitch streaming full time, which still blows my mind. I'm like, oh my God, why do people watch? You know what I mean? So I guess
let me do this.
Yeah, I mean, like every day, it's like I say, I try to stay grateful, and you know, it's always humbling to think like, oh my God, like people actually watch me. Like, what? Can I cuss on this show?
You can cuss.
Okay,
we're like PG-13, so don't cuss all the time.
Okay,
but sometimes.
Yeah, I'll try.
Yeah, you're
I'll
good.
try. I've got kind of a lewd mouth, but I'll try to keep it on the low.
It's quite fucking right. It'll be okay. We can deal with you cussing a little bit.
But yeah.
Aw. Oh my gosh, your peeps are here. Like people in chat that like know you are here. Thank you so much for bringing in your humans. Appreciate that.
Oh, thank you, humans.
All right. So you stream here. So you started as a musician. What?
Yeah. So I mean, actually started when I was like 19 years old. I got fired from. I was working at Best Buy. And I ended up getting fired, and one of my friends was in this pop punk band called Halifax.
Okay.
And I ended up to like selling merch with them, and I got a taste of the tour life, and kind of. I mean, actually, this kind of might bounce around all over the place, but since
go for it.
Yeah.
We're free-forming it. Go for it.
It was like kind of like drugs and alcohol came into the scene, got introduced to it, and it was like being on the road and traveling. Like I kind of got like I found like this passion for. So I did that until I was like 22, 23, and then came back home and ended up getting sober. But from that point moving forward, gaming was always a part of kind of like everything I've known. So during this whole process, after that, getting sober, lost touch with music, but then I guess 26, 27, like retouch bass, ended up like working in the electronic music or the EDM industry. And God, sorry, I just realized how much I'm saying it's like, well, you know, when you're put on
don't get self-conscious. No, don't get self-conscious. You can say it's totally okay. Nobody's counting. Nobody has a counter on you.
I guarantee you somebody's counting. but there we go.
72.
Yeah, eventually I worked in the kind of like EDM industry, and things took off for me for a little bit, and it was cool. I got to travel, and eventually it was like, I think as we get older, like our passions kind of change due to like
Sure.
circumstance or whatever it might be. Stop making music, and I'm streaming.
All right. All right. But that's different. Hold on. Let's go back to the drugs part. So you just casually were on off drugs, like just super casually,
Oh
no big
my
deal.
God, if we want to start there, it goes
Well, this is a mental health talk show, so we're
okay,
probably
yeah,
going to
yeah, so
start
we should
there.
probably talk about that. So,
Yeah,
I mean, I guess
probably.
I guess background of everything is I grew up in like a broken home. It was kind of like abusive. My I mean, it might get kind of dark, but I mean, this is my story. This is kind of like where I come from.
Yeah, don't sugarcoat it just because you think other people need to hear it brighter.
No,
It's dark.
I don't necessarily sugarcoat much. But my parents divorced when I was 2, and I believe like I don't know necessarily what makes me a a drug addict. All I know is like this is where I came from, and it's like I don't necessarily blame any of my past on who I am today or any events. That being said, I was about 2. My parents got divorced. I grew up in a town called the San Fernando Valley, which is a suburb inside of Los Angeles, and my parents broke up. Um, Father was abusive towards my mother. Moving forward, I don't know like if he's an alcoholic. I know we have like alcoholics in the family, but I just felt like I never fit in from the time I was elementary school all the way until high school. And it's kind of weird looking back. Like I feel like talking to people, it comes naturally, but anytime I'm kind of asked about my story, like there's always like this sense of uneasiness, which isn't a bad thing. It
Sure.
keeps me going back to that. Also, it keeps me centered and knowing where I came from. So, school never really fed in. I was kind of like this tall, gangly kid. I had like a big head. I mean, I still have a big head, but it was like, I guess like proportionally, like it grew to my head later. I mean, in elementary school, the kids called me ET because I had like this big head and like these long, gangly arms
Aw.
and stuff. But you know, and then like junior high ended up looking better.
Okay.
I got voted most popular in a class of 14. And
Okay.
yeah, which
That's
wasn't
more
that
than
good.
I got. That's pretty good. I didn't get that.
but
So
uh
you're
but
fine.
but high school was rough, and it was like looking back, I don't think I was necessarily a bad kid. I mean, I was a kid, but being a product of well, I guess my parents being products of their parents.
Right. Right.
My father grew up in an abusive home, and I ended up moving in with him for high school.
Oh
And it got
shit.
rough for me, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
from a physical standpoint, all the way to like an emotional standpoint, which is like it's like, I guess I was born in the 80s, so I was like a 90s kid. And I don't know, it's like I feel like a lot of my friends have similar stories in the sense of like where they came from. And I
Right.
mean, I don't want to necessarily blame it on the times, but that's growing up in the 90s, I feel like was completely growing up from, the 2000s and now. And I mean, it was like I had like a very toxic, like physical abusive relationship with my father, and it
Mhm.
kind of spurred off. And I mean, carrying that over into even my 20s or 30s, it was something I had to come to terms with. But one of the realities is I do believe, I think he did the best job he knew how to, and that's exactly where he came from. I don't know if he's
Whoa.
necessarily aware, but so all of that being said, like move forward, I find drugs at the age of, I want to say like 15 is the first time I ever got. I don't know what came first. I can't remember if it was weed or Vicodin, but I had an earache. The most memorable, I should say, the thing that kind of like triggered me, not even necessarily triggered, but the thing I look back to and remember is I had an earache when I was, I think, 15 years old. I was going from Los Angeles to Arizona, and I was swimming, and the doctor said due to the pressure difference, I had like this nasty earache, and the only
Sure.
thing that they could do was prescribe Vicodin.
Oh,
So that was, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure if that was the right call on his behalf, but I had my first dance with opiates, and it was kind of like, I mean, it was progressive for me. It was like, I ended up taking the opiates and getting high and going to school. And I remember like it was like this crazy experience. Like my parents ended up counting the pills, and they found out, and they thought it was the end of the. It was legitimately like the first time I ever had done any drugs, and it was prescribed by the
right.
doctor. And I mean, I was 15, you know what I mean? It was like,
Right.
or 15 or 16. It was like at the time Eminem was like popping off. He was talking
Yep.
about taking, Vicodin and all of that shit. So I mean that's basically that was like my first kind of like I guess dance with opiates, like I said. And I remember so part of the reason I brought up like not fitting in was I remember taking the opiates and or the Vicodin, laying in bed, and like the opiate blanket, like as they say, like kind of like wrapped itself around me. And at that point, I didn't care what anyone thought, and
Yeah.
nothing mattered. Like as far as like
Right.
fitting in, securities, home life, nothing mattered. All I knew is that in that moment, like I felt okay.
Right.
And then fast
Right.
forward, 18, 19, I get kicked out of my house, and I move in with a bunch of older people. And at this point, it isn't like it's like like if somebody has pills, then we're popping them, and it's not necessarily like we're out seeking it or anything, drinking. But then I kind of get wrapped up in the a year later, go out on the road, and that's when I'm touring, and drugs and alcohol are just everywhere. You know what I
Easily
mean?
accessible, just like right
Yeah.
there, available for you.
So it's like then you start dabbling, and I'm constantly drinking. I end up coming home, and I think from the time it was like I was functioning and everything was fine. Even when I was at Best Buy, it was kind of like actually it got to a point where it was like I could get booze whenever I want. But I come back home from the tour, and that's kind of like where it pops off. For me, it's like I'm dating this girl. I'm a piece of shit. Like I'm not able to kind of look at the things that I'm doing in the relationship that aren't right. And one of the things I do, so like I'm a full-blown addict. My mentality when I'm kind of in that sick state is to lie, steal, cheat, and blame everyone for any kind of like misgiving or wrongdoing that happens. And that's just like that's the reality. That's who I am. If I'm not in like a state where I'm constant or continuously checking in with my mental health, you know what I mean? That's like my
Yeah.
first go-to. I should say
Yeah.
that's my natural state. And it's almost like a what would it be? Kind of like secondary to do what I'm doing now, but the results are always going to be better when I'm constant when I'm keeping myself in check. But all that
Wow.
being said is like, by the time I'm 23, I have like a $200 to $300 a day like opiate slash heroin problem. I'm in and out of like the drunk tank, going to LA County, Ventura County Jail. And I remember at the point, like I ended up getting out of jail and calling my mom, and I didn't even call to ask her for help. It was because my girlfriend at the time called because she was worried sick for obvious reasons. And I hadn't talked to my mom in 3 or 4 months. And I had a pretty good relationship. Like for the most part, my mom raised me when I was a kid. Like single mother, busting her ass, working 2 jobs to put her kid through private school. But I call her, and I remember her telling me like I knew the next time I heard from you or about you, it was going to be from jail or you were going to be dead. So I asked her for help, and from that point, she's like, you gotta go back to school, get a job,
Right.
and I'll let you live here for 6 months. After 6 months, you're out. And then I think one of the things was like you had to go to like outpatient rehab.
Sure.
So I end up finding like a 12-step meeting and a bunch of dudes, and from there it was like they gave me tasks, and at this point I didn't know anything in my life except for misery. Even growing up as a kid, like I said, I
Yeah.
couldn't I couldn't do any of that. So it was like from this 12-step program, I end up like finding purpose in life, and I didn't know that I could not be miserable in a sense. You understand what I'm saying?
I know exactly what I mean. I don't know exactly what you're saying. I'm not you, but I know,
Right.
having grown up in an abusive home, I 100% feel that whole like, oh, life doesn't have to be shit. Are you sure? Like, are you sure? And if your only coping mechanism at the time, was that blanket, that veil that Vicodin gave you, that pills gave you, it all makes sense. If that's all you know how to do to make those awful feelings of yourself and the world go away, it makes sense that you fall towards that. So I do want to go back. I want to let you finish, and I do want to go back to the whole like you think that's your natural state, because that part really fascinates me.
Hmm.
But so your mom told you have to go back, and you took the 12-step program, and did that help?
I
So
mean,
it gave
so
you purpose. And
that's the thing, and I don't think that it did. It gave me purpose, and for me personally, it's like, look, like as far as everyone beliefs go, so I guess like I'll touch on this, and then we could go back. I had to find a power that was greater than myself. Call it
yeah,
spirituality, finding a god, whatever you might be. And I
sure,
like the biggest thing is I won't ever push that on anyone. Like all I can say is what worked for me. I mean, essentially, that's what I had to find because in another part of like when I'm using, I become in a sense like a Satanist, like not from a theological standpoint of like Satan, like hell and all of that,
right,
but
right,
more
right.
so Anton LaVeyanism. You know what I mean? Where it's like I worship myself. I'm only out for number one, and all of that comes into play. But yeah, sense of purpose, and it's like the biggest thing now is you have different actually to me it's like different sobrieties. You have physical sobriety where you're not using drugs, but then also
Sure.
next is the emotional part, which kind of comes into play with your mental state, and that's the biggest thing. So it's not only I could stop using drugs completely, but that doesn't solve for who I am. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
said, going back to the tendencies, my natural tendency is to lie, steal, cheat, have resentment towards people, and yeah.
Huh.
But all of that being said, the sobriety came. Then it's kind of like, then I was able to. One of the ways to stay sober is reaching out and working with other people.
Right.
So it's like I have to give back to constantly keep in touch.
Got it. Got it.
But yeah.
That's wow. So first of all, thank you for being so insanely open with your story, just like rolling it out there, and I appreciate that because I think you might get used to telling it even, but it doesn't make it less doesn't make you less vulnerable when you do it, right? You're still opening up your heart and being like, here's who
Right.
I really am. So I really do appreciate that you are willing to do that for strangers. Um and that tells me a lot about you, that drug addled you probably would never be able to stand for. But I I am fascinated, and I know I'm super hung up on it. It might not be the point, but I'm fascinated by this, like, because I've thought about it a lot too. When I was growing up in an abusive
Hmm.
household, I constantly, first of all, I thought the world was shit and people were shit, and because of that, then they were out to get me. So I had to get them first, and I had to show
Right.
them first, and so I kind of like to me that question of who came first, the like really crappy version of me, or the good version of me was just eaten up by the crappy version of me because life was so shitty, and then the good version of me was able to come back out, or were you shitty the whole time and you just have the opportunity to be better. So I want to know your take on that.
I think a lot of it is well, as humans, it's kind of like everything's learned behavior. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I mean, I don't think that. So a lot of it for me, it was really weird because, like I said, growing up in that household. The other thing is,
Right.
like I saw my pops, like he has an. Like I hate to say this, I mean, listen here. Like the bottom line is, before I say anything about my father, is like
Yeah.
I love him for who he is. He came from a sick family. Like I can't control it, and I just want to make sure. I mean, I guess the whole thing is I've come to terms with who he is, and I can accept him, and I love him for who he is. But going back and now saying that,
Yeah.
like I just don't want to make it seem like I don't like I hate the guy. You know what I mean?
No,
But
no, that's fair, because I say that I hate my parents, so you're totally That's a good disclaimer to make. So go for
Right.
it.
So, I mean, I guess looking back, it was like I kind of want to say like I believe my father, like my grandpa, actually said it. He told one of my brothers, he's like, your father has a fundamental problem with the truth. And growing up, like I saw kind of like what I thought that like what I thought a man should be. And it's like it was
Right.
constant lies, stretching of the truth, all of this. So it was like
Mm-hmm.
learned. I
Mm-hmm.
genuinely do think that we have more good in us than bad, or we have more good. I shouldn't say even bad, because I don't I don't believe that I was a good person, or I don't believe I was a bad person trying to get good. I believe I was a sick person trying to get well, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a ton of sense. That's actually super poetic. Thank you.
So yeah, I think when it goes back to that, I believe that it just comes along with my sickness, and it's kind of like one of those things where the good will always be there. You know what I mean? And it's not, or I should say, like, it's now it's come to the point where I don't think there's good. I'm Don't get me wrong. There's like there are bad people out there, but a majority
Sure.
of the people, I believe, like a large majority, are just sick people who are trying to get well. So as I get older, it's like or from an addiction standpoint, it's like once it kind of I believe a lot of it is learned behavior, and then you just end up getting more sick and more sick and more sick. But the good news is, like, there's a solution out there for everyone. It's like, what are you willing to do to get well, though? That makes sense.
No, that makes a ton of sense. So do you feel like do you kind of look back and you blame drugs for the person that you were, or you feel like you were that person and then the drugs just kind of made it work, like
Yeah,
amplified it?
well, that's the thing is I will find any excuse to get high, and then I will use at the people I have resentments. Like, kind of like
Mm.
one of the things I learned from the 12-step program is, like, it says in their text that resentment is the number one offender. Like, it destroys more alcoholics than anything else. And it's a big part of like the 12-step program is being an alcoholic or having an addict mindset.
Hmm.
um I will find like the dumbest shit to have resentment towards people. And then what happens is I'll basically carry on the burden of all these resentments. And like, if I'm in my sick state, right? Like, I don't take
Sure.
care of it and I don't reach out and figure out like what's going on. Basically, all of that will just kind of almost like a pressure cooker, So there's like all this pressure building. You leave it on, eventually it just explodes. So it's like
Sure.
I'll use that just to justify getting high. You know what I mean? So it's like now what I do to it, and I guess now I always like to refer to now, because saying super having a positive attitude just in general now is
Yeah.
something that's foreign to me, but the result I get from it makes me feel good. And I know if I'm constantly working towards a solution, that I can't be in a negative mindset. You know what I mean? But yeah, now
Absolutely.
it's kind of like, let's say, like, for example, resentment. Like, fuck, what can I do? Like, if I'm upset with you, I have to look at why I'm upset. What is my part in it? And generally, I find, I mean, there's most instances for me, I have a part in, you know what I mean, or
Of
something that
course.
caused. So making sure that I can identify that, reflect back on that, look at my part where I was wrong, ask for forgiveness, and kind of forgive willingly towards other people. It's like such a huge thing.
Understood. Understood. Do you feel like wow, that there's a lot to like just unpack there. Do you feel like no, I got nothing. I got nothing. The interview's over. No, I'm kidding. No, but do you feel like you are able to maintain your own wellness fairly easily now, or do you feel like that comes at a price?
S-
Like, do you feel like you're constantly like fighting yourself in a way?
For me, and I believe mental health is a lot like physical health. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's not.
Yeah.
It's like a muscle. So it's like you literally. It's something you constantly need to work on. Like I constantly have to keep in check. It's really hard, and that's the thing that's kind of crazy, right? Is doing certain things to, and I mean I'm not like I'm far from perfect, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
None of us
there's
are. Yeah.
times I fuck like I mean I ended up relapsing a few years ago, but it comes back into it comes back to always staying in check, you know what I mean? Like and being prepared. So it's one of those things where it's like a constant thing you're having to keep in check and work on daily. Like it's not like this thing that's just like, oh, I could call it in and make sure it's fine one
Yeah.
second. You know what I mean?
I think that's what frustrated me the most in general about like mental illness. So I never dealt with addiction, but mental illness and
Uh-huh.
going back into depression and anxiety. It was always I'm kind of connecting this piece that you're talking about with resentment and mental illness because I always resented the fact that like it's not fair. Why do I have to have a mental illness? Why do I have to have depression? Why do I have to
Right.
maintain the fact like I have to reach out to people? I have to make sure that I'm not secluding myself. I have to make sure that when I'm upset, I take care of myself. I have to like not give in to these thoughts that are natural to me. Like it's natural for me to hate myself. It's natural for me, and then those natural things fuel me to just be not a good person and you know all the bad stuff. So I think that's a really interesting concept of like resenting resenting yourself because you're not like everybody else. Like this does not come easily to you, right? Like
Right.
you're not just naturally mentally healthy. Like it's a struggle. It's a battle that you fight every day and it's worth it because the results of fighting it are way better than not. The life that you get to live when you fight is so much better than you don't. But there's definitely like I hear it coming from you. There's definitely like an exhaustion just in general of having to constantly like battle that.
Right. Well, I don't know if exhaustion is the right word because
Hmm.
it is. I don't want to say because it gets to a point where because I mean it's always going to be, I mean, again, going back to kind of like the positive thing, it's tough, especially starting out, but I mean since it's one of those things, I mean that was so hard, you know, getting sober and just I mean essentially I had to relearn every like someone told me when I first got sober, they're like there's only one thing you have to change. He's like, that's everything. You know what I mean? So it's kind of
Yeah.
like learning to going through and learning that. But I mean, you know, the reality is it's tough in the beginning and it's maybe it's not, I don't want to say it's exhausting, but it's gratifying. Maybe it is exhausting, but at the same time it's gratifying. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God, excuse
Absolutely.
me.
You're fine. Are you
Yeah,
like you're
sorry.
probably maybe nervous and like swallowing air? I do
Oh
that. I
no,
do that too.
I'm drinking a nice kombucha right now, trying to
Oh,
make it,
that's lovely.
you know, taking care of my gut health too.
Yeah, that's a big one. Are you Yeah, we'll dive into that. We'll dive into that on a separate. Yeah, what do you do now to maintain yourself at like a semi decent state? Like what do you have to you have to do?
Hmm.
Like if you start not feeling good, you have to check in and be like, did I do these 5 things? Like what are the things that you do to maintain
Yeah,
yourself at a
so
decent
there's, I
place?
mean, so it's hard now with the whole COVID-19 stuff
COVID.
going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I was going to 12-step meetings, you know what I mean? Like a big thing is like you learn from them. Like I'm a big advocate for those meetings too, you know what I mean? Like they help me, and again, I don't think it's the only way. All I know is what worked for me, and that was the thing
Right.
that was
Right.
the thing that did it for me. And again, like I don't necessarily, before we go any deeper, like I just kind of want to clarify,
Go for
people
it.
get sober, and I believe that that's not the only way out there. There's other ways to do it, but again,
Sure.
like, all
Sure.
I can speak is like on
This
all
is
I
what
can talk
got
about
you.
is, yeah,
Yeah.
my experiences. So
Right. Absolutely.
but I mean, as far as like as far as like things I do, it's like, you know, meditation is a huge one for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like actually stopping and, I mean, there's so many different things or so many different practices of meditation that are great. I mean, even like there's that app Headspace on
Yeah.
So Headspace is great. Like I've written a few, I can't remember the guy's off or the author's name right now, but he's it's like the practice of mindful meditation. You know what I mean? I read a few
There's
books
so
on that.
many of them out there. So yeah,
There's
I don't blame you for not remembering.
so even I mean even if it's as simple as stopping, like literally stopping for 10 minutes a day, you know, and just sitting in silence and trying to focus, trying to be present now. Because one of the things somebody told me early on too was, you know, when I'm not focusing on I guess almost from a meditation standpoint, like stopping, just feeling everything, how am I feeling, checking in, all of that. If I can do that, stay in that thought process for like 10, 15 minutes, like that can be a form of meditation. And one of the things somebody told me, they're kind of like, you know, if you're if you're in the future, you know, it's like you've got one foot in fear and the future. And if you're in the past, you're kind of like living there with resentment, and all you're doing is just, you know, you're almost just squatting and taking on a or taking a dump on the present, which is right now. So it's like, you know, it's crazy.
Whoa.
That's
Oh, I like that.
you
I
know what I
like
mean? It's
that.
like the future. If I'm living, there's a possibility. If I'm living in fear, then it's because I'm like there's something in the future that I'm worried about
Right.
versus focusing on right now. And
Right.
resentment is always stemmed or it comes from the past. So it's like that's the biggest thing, I guess. So you know, meditation. That's another thing. Always staying present, living right now, reaching out to other people. I mean, even streaming. You know what I mean? Like I'll talk about my past experiences, and it's not in a like non-glorifying way, I guess, you know, like I try to
Yeah.
reflect back and I mean
Yeah. I don't think
educate
there's
people on how
anything. There's no way that you could really be glorifying about. I guess. I guess you
I
can't
mean
be.
I can be like,
But
oh man, I was in jail, it was so cool, like I did this. I mean, I guess it's the second ego comes into play when I'm talking about my past, and you know what I mean, then there's kind of
sure.
like the glorifying side of things, but
Right.
yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there's like a bunch of stuff, you know, and I guess now a lot of it's second nature. I do have to keep it in check because I'm human, you know what I mean?
Of
Like I
course.
always believe like I will never be perfect, but as long as I'm progressing each day, that's like a fucking win in my book.
That's amazing. So you have to
Yeah.
continue going to these 12-step meetings. You meditate. You practice mindfulness, and like all of that is kind of what keeps
Right.
you in a good, healthy place. Yeah. Do you have people that you lean on as well?
I do. So I mean, there's like a core group that I found, and you know, it was a bunch of dudes with similar values. Even I have kind of like life mentors that that's a big thing too, you know what I mean? Like I stay stupid. Like I'll probably throw out so many dumb sayings during this interview, but I mean those dumb
No, they're
sayings
sayings for a reason.
I
They're
know, but
around for a
they're
reason.
like I feel like so stupid saying them. Like I stay stupid so I could remain teachable. You know what I mean? Because the second I think I know everything, that's the second I'm losing. So it's like, you know, like I try to find people that I guess just in life in general, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
um, find people that just know more about that thing in general than I know, and I use them as mentors and kind of you know, and I could check in with them, see how they're doing, ask for their advice, and go forward from there.
That's awesome. What makes somebody, I guess, somebody you look up to? Like, what are the qualities in people that you like push and strive for?
So for me, the thing I've always searched for is someone I can relate to. You know what I mean? Because
Sure.
if I can relate to that person, then okay. So first and foremost, I have like a huge problem with authority. Obviously, kind of like stemming from my background.
Sure.
So the thing is, if I have someone telling me what to do and I don't feel like I can relate to them, then it's an automatic turn off for me, and I
Yeah.
just won't listen to them. So for me, it's finding people I can relate to, and it doesn't have to be. I mean, it's through whatever experience I'm doing, whatever I guess experience I'm having at that time. Like I will try to find a mentor that will kind of not carry me, but guide me along the way,
Yeah.
and I'll just even I mean, that was the biggest thing when I got sober. Like I found a dude who had like a similar story to me. He was like in and out of jail, couldn't stay sober, ended up, you know, doing all of this stuff, and he's kind of like a life mentor. And I mean, there was a time when I was like calling him every single day to check in. now it's kind of slowed down. Yeah, I mean, I could call him every day if I wanted to, which in reality I should, but as I get older, life changes, it's kind of like everything changes, but I mean, just being able to stay in touch with my core beliefs and being able to reach out to him like that is absolutely amazing. So,
That
just
is
like I guess
amazing. I
yeah.
think people normally have like parents for that, but if you don't have parental figures,
Mhm.
you check in with other people who are mentors to you. Absolutely. You like pick
Right.
people up along the way who fill in the gaps where your family could have should have been, right?
Exactly.
We have a few questions, you guys. So are you comfortable answering questions live? I probably should have asked you this before.
Yeah, I don't care.
Okay, cool. I figured because you're a live streamer, I never have to worry about that. Really, like, are you cool talking live about yourself? Do you ever do that? Is that an experience? Okay, so let's see. Uh, you guys, exclamation the letter Q and ask your question after that, and it'll be added to a queue, and then we can keep going. You are part of the reason why this conversation is as awesome as it is, because your participation means that we can kind of keep it going. So anything that you want to learn helps other people who are potentially watching this later and wondering the same thing. So don't hesitate, ask your question. It can be to me, it can be to Trav. Probably should be to Trav since he's the guest, but
Wait.
yeah, let's go for it. All right, Tally Twitch asks, at what point do you feel youngsters cross the line between going into going into the drugs/resentment spiral and still being at the point where someone can get through to them?
So that's a really good question, right? Because we have programs like Dare or like these drug outreach programs where I don't necessarily I believe a lot of them actually have a tendency to push kids away. And actually, I mean, I know Dare for me was like the absolute worst thing ever.
Really?
Um it was just like this. It was like this thing. It was like this authoritative thing that just instantly, you know what I mean? And it's like a, a lot of, I feel like a lot of people who end up going, and not everyone, but I feel like a lot of people who end up going down that road automatically have like an issue with authority, and not necessarily like, I don't want to say like police authority, but just authority in general.
No, but I
So,
get that because they're not like you said that you can't relate to them. They're just people who are like, don't do drugs, and you're like,
right.
okay, whatever.
And
I get.
yeah, so the other thing too is there's so many people, and I'm like I'm not an advocate for like don't do drugs, you know what I mean? Like I believe people can do drugs, you know what I mean? And it's just because I don't have the capacity to use them normally, like I don't think that people should not do them at all, you know what I mean?
Huh?
So I mean, going back to getting through to youngsters, it's one of those things where everybody has their own journey, and they kind of have to go through and identify when they have the problem on their own, which is so hard because everyone that tried to help me when I was younger, like nobody could help me until I wanted to help me, you know what I mean? It
Absolutely.
was like I can always be in a point where I wanted to want help, but I didn't actually want help. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was like
No, it does. Cause
I had to be ready to actually. I believe that it's one of those things where it's like it's not until the person's ready. Like there's nothing you
yeah,
can say or do unless the person is willing to accept, like willingness. That's the big thing. It's like, is that person willing to be helped in general, I guess.
what got you to that point where you were finally willing to be helped?
It was just, I mean, like I mean, it was like I ended up, so what ended up happening for me, like I was selling dope to kind of pay for my dope habit. And it wasn't like I was no,
Wow.
by no means was I any big dope deal. I mean, I was homeless by the time I was 23. Like I was in and out of drunk tanks, jails. And I mean, it was 6'4", like 100 and I mean, I'm still like a stick now, like as far as skinny, but I'm 100 and like 74 pounds now. It was like 149 pounds, and
Oh,
it was
jeez.
just like I was not healthy, like couldn't stay out of jail, um, homeless. So I mean, for some people, it doesn't take going going that path or that route, but I had to find a bottom, and it was an emotional, physical point where, you know, I just couldn't. I literally couldn't dig myself any deeper. I had two. I was looking at two felonies at the time, so it was like, you know, I was like, oh. And even like I said, like it was one of those things where I didn't even know I could not be miserable, but I had almost like a oh my gosh, kind of like a moment of reason just for a few seconds where I was like, oh my God, maybe this isn't the right way to live.
And then that spurred on the rest of you
Right.
be
And that kind of
finally
like
going,
spurred out. So,
huh.
yeah.
That's what the reason that fascinates me is because I've heard of a lot of addicts talk about the fact that the excuses that you can come up with to explain to yourself why you're not getting help, and why you're not as bad as somebody else are like absolutely boundless, and it takes something absolutely life changing for you to want to turn around, to want to change your lifestyle. And I don't think that people recognize the depth of that. Like, imagine if, like, just something you do and something you take for granted and something that people talk to you all the time. I'm trying to think of like a comparison. Like, all right, like drinking milk. Like, I'm lactose intolerant and I drink milk, right?
Hmm.
And I'll still drink it some, or like I'll still have pizza, and I know it's bad for me and I will still have it, and
Right.
like whatever, I go to the back, I call it a day, right? But and the reason I'm comparing it to something so trivial is because when you are addicted to, and please correct me, I don't want to like misspeak or speak for somebody, but when you have an addiction, it is like something, it's so core and it's such a part of your life that you don't, like, you almost don't second guess it. Is that
Hmm.
right, or am I kind of throwing stuff
No, I
out
think you're
there?
right.
Yeah. So that's why I say like something. Now imagine like milk literally ruined your life, and you have to
Hmm.
be like, oh, I guess I'm changing. Like, you just have to change. You have to change the way you view the world. You have to change how you understand the world to be. You have to change like coping mechanism, everything. I'm trying to compare it to trivialize it, to compare it for the fact that it's so life altering. It's like being another person. Does that make sense? I feel like holy shit, like I've
It's
ranted off. It's like being another person and being like, "Oh, I can't be this person anymore."
right. Yeah. I mean, it is, you know what I mean? And what goes back to the whole thing too. It's like, you know, I mean, it goes back to the whole like good, like I'm not a bad person trying to get good. It goes back to the sick being well. You know, it's like I'm still the same person, but the reality is there's things that I have to change. And I mean, you know, it's crazy because yeah, like I said earlier, that's my natural state. Like, and I mean, still to this day, you know what I mean? Like I will catch myself slipping. Like as far as before I got sober, I was not an honest person at all. And I mean,
Okay.
that's like also such a little thing, you know? Like honesty and telling the truth. And this is my kind of like view on it. Like I believe that does wonders for your mental health. You know what I mean?
Oh
Even kind of
yeah.
like exaggerating, you know, it's such a weird thing because you look back and it's like, oh my gosh, you know, I could stretch the truth just this once, or excuse me, just this once. Then it goes on to the next, and it goes on to the next, and then I mean, I still do it. You know what I mean? But I'll be the difference between then and now is I'll be able to catch it now and be like, okay, like yo, you're fucking up. Like, get back centered, stay humble, remember who you are, remember where you come from, and I mean, even that. So, which that goes on to like a whole other thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I believe that I'm gonna rant so much because I'm all. I mean, I guess
Hey,
this is
hey, I'm ranted out, so like you got to pick up the slack and rant some more for me. So go for it.
okay. So this is another thing I believe with for me at least. I can't speak on behalf of anyone else again, but for me, one of the big things for me, one of the reasons I used to get high is because I wanted to block out any sense of emotional growth. Where emotional growth comes from me from either pain or uncomfortability. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So it's like instead of like, you know, it was like I ended up relapsing. And this is a perfect example, right? So I ended up relapsing when I was 30 years old. At the time, I went through a really rough patch. Like, my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. My dog died. The chick I wanted to propose to, I found out was cheating on me. and I ended up getting kidney stone. Like all of this came within a year. And those are those are those are things where emotionally like I have to deal with, like I have to
Yeah.
grow through.
Yeah.
But instead what ended up happening is with the kidney stone came a prescription for Percocet.
Yep.
And because I was disconnected from kind of like where I started off getting grounded, which I had all the tools and opportunities to stay sober. But again, because of the like the emotional pain that came with all of that at once,
Yeah.
instead of coping with it and trying to grow from it, I just fucking relapsed. You know what I
You
mean?
just checked out. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I believe that that's another thing. Like emotional growth is such a for your mental, like, well, I guess you could say I should be saying I believe like mental and emotional health kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah. There's a yes. That's all I'm gonna say. I don't want to talk over you in that sense. Like,
No, you're good. Talk.
no,
I ranted.
no,
We could just rant back and forth.
no. This is because I can't because we will. Um, but you're totally right. It's not who the fuck wants to have to deal. Who the fuck wants emotional growth? Like when you stop and it's hard. It's freaking hard to confront all the things that you were dealing with and
Hmm.
to be like, all the bullshit that they say that ends up actually working, like this too shall pass, and okay, I can
Hmm.
get through this, I've gotten through worse, like all those things
Yeah,
that are
absolutely.
just sayings that actually do work. Like it's so hard to come to a place where those make sense to you versus I wouldn't say it's easier though to relapse. It's you're not exactly making it easier on yourself, but it feels easier because you're removing so much of that um conversation. Like what's the word I'm looking for? Your potential. You're removing
Hmm.
that potential from ever happening. You're just saying like this is what I'm used to. This is what I want more of. I'm good. Versus saying, all right, I guess I have to confront this and plow through it and move up and continue moving ahead. That's they're so polar opposites is the point that I'm trying to make.
Right. Um, and that's the thing is like, I guess the way I cope with that now, I don't want to call it cope because cope sounds like I have to deal with it, which I guess I do, but it's like now it's like any when I have that pain or that emotional or mental kind of like issue I go through now, like it's not like, oh shit, like I have to deal with this. It's like, you know what, like I get to deal with this, like I get to grow as a human. And then in turn,
Right.
like the reality is now it's like, I mean, for I mean, this is like a perfect example. Like one of the things, like one of the reasons I love talking about it, because I never know what someone else is going to be to relate to or
Right.
hear from something that's going to help them. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's like I get to have these experiences where I grow mentally, emotionally. My mental health gets to stay in check. And then somebody is like, oh my God, you know what? I can relate to that. Travis might have done this. Maybe this will work for me. And then in turn, maybe they can help someone. And it's kind of like this continuous cycle that goes on and on. You know what I mean? And,
Yeah.
and that's the reality is that's what helped me get sober is somebody took the time and shared their experience with me on how they did it, and now it's like the only way I get to hold on to the things I do is to give it back to other people, if that makes sense.
No, it does make a ton of sense, and it's terrifying. And there's this and we'll talk about this. It's in a few questions. So sorry, Wami time, Tristan, Tyrion, Neil. I promise we'll get to your questions. We're just kind of on a roll. But it's there's this concept of post traumatic growth. But the problem is until you can get to post traumatic growth, you have to confront the trauma, and that is the part that feels nearly impossible to so many people because it
Hmm.
feels like you are giving control over to the trauma. It feels like you are saying, okay, I'm going to, like, I have to work with you. I have to confront you. I have to think about you again. And that all feels like steps that you take to give power back to the trauma, but it's really you taking the power back from the trauma. And then
Yeah,
that is what enables you to grow.
which is crazy. You're absolutely I believe you're absolutely right too. I mean, that's the thing is like, you don't want to look back and kind of those are I guess for for me, it's like those memories I have are so painful. But being able to, like you said, that's the thing. It's like you go back and in a sense, I had to relive a lot of the shit I went through. But the reality is, because I went through that and I'm able to identify those things, it's like you never like you never know how. I should say the thing that helps me get through them a lot now is, when I go to the 12-step meetings and somebody asks for help, it's like, okay, like this is what I went through. And
Yeah.
somebody's like, oh my God, I had this, and this happening.
Right.
Obviously, they don't know exactly how I feel, but they can
Right.
relate to the circumstances or
Right.
circumstances and situations. And in turn, they can help other people or other people can help you. And it's kind of like this. I mean, it's a beautiful like give and take thing. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
I mean that's what keeps me going on even through like the darkest. I mean, I was like I had like, I mean, there was crazy stuff I went through as being as a child, and it's like I said, just being able to give back has been the greatest gift of all. It's not even like, it's crazy. Like I was homeless, you know what I mean? Like couldn't
Right.
stay out of jail, and it's like I look like I have like all this crazy computer, like the what is it? Like all the tangible stuff I have is like I could give two shits about that. The reality is being able to work with another human and seeing them grow is like the real, like that's
Yeah.
the real kind of like what not winnings, but like that's the
It's
gratifying
worth
thing to
it.
see. You know what
Gratifying.
I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It almost, I always say, like, I don't want to say it this way, and again, this isn't the same as yours, but like when I get to talk to people about mental health and share my story of having depression and anxiety and coming through that onto the other side, and I hear people be like, oh my God, I went and talked to a therapist because of you, or I went and talked to a doctor and now they put me on medication and I feel so much better. Like whatever it is, all those things, there's a piece of me that goes like, okay, it was worth it. Like that was miserable and I wish I didn't have to go through it, but like being able to help and relate to somebody now makes it almost worth it. Is that what you're trying to say? Or am I kind
Exactly.
of okay? Yeah.
100%.
All right, let's go back to our questions. Have
Yeah.
you heard
Sorry.
of don't please do not be sorry. This is great. This means we're I don't know, we're getting along. This is great. Political Splick asks, have you heard of multi-generational trauma? And if you have, do you think it's accurate for your family?
I haven't. I'm assuming it's just kind of like carried on trauma through. Is it
Yeah,
is it learned trauma through?
yeah. Like
Explain,
you're
break it down just so I don't assume.
no, it's literally exactly what it sounds like, where like you have trauma because your dad had trauma because his dad had trauma because his dad probably had trauma, and so
Right.
like it just carries it. It's when nobody, basically the simple terms of, it's when nobody deals with their shit, so they just take it out on each other. And yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely, and it's such a crazy thing too. And I know the crazy thing with it is, I think now we are. It's mental health now. I mean, we have. I believe it's harder to deal with now, just with in the age of social media and everything being public. But at the same time, I also believe now we have so many more tools to
Yeah.
treat those things. Which is, I mean, just for instance, like talking to you, like therapy. Like, I mean, therapy with my parents. Like, if I told them to go to therapy, they told me to kick rocks. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Right.
so
Yeah.
the crazy thing is now, even with my brothers who had to deal with my father, every one of my siblings, it's like, I look at them with their kids and I don't have any kids, but I look at them with their kids and they all have the most amazing relationships with their kids. And even seeing the things they've gone through, like I don't see any of the like granted nobody's perfect again, but I don't see like the crazy toxic stuff that our father did to us. Like I don't see that with his kids either. And I mean, I don't think like, I don't know, because I'm not like, I don't have a wife or a kid or a girlfriend or any of that stuff, so I don't know. But the beautiful thing is now is being able to identify I guess just the factors that you are the what is it, the toxic
Masculinity.
what. No, well, it's not. I mean, that does come into play, but kind of like
Right.
the the toxic traits that he has, like
Right.
like that have been passed on that came from his father, his mother, and their parents and their parents. So I guess being able to identify those things now and break it down, and I guess you know I'm not nipping it at the bud, but as soon as it does come into play, like identifying it,
No.
being like, okay, you know
Yep.
what I mean? And
Yep.
like I said, we have tools now, therapy, self-help groups, all of that, which is, 50 years ago, I think that was just really I don't necessarily know if it was shunned upon, but yeah.
It was more, I mean, there's stigma now. There was more stigma back then.
Right.
It wasn't easier, that's for sure. But yeah, we've talked about that here also. So you talk about your dad a lot, but women usually talk about their mothers and how, they pass along,
Hmm.
and a lot of the conversations we've had here with other women are basically like the buck stops here. Like I will not be what my mom was. I will not be what my parents were. I will not I have the power to make it different. It doesn't have to be that way for my kids. And I always like that always makes me tear up and really and I believe that for you as well. I mean, no, you don't have kids, you don't have a wife or a girlfriend, but
Hmm.
if you do that kind of work on yourself, you're always going to turn out better. You're always going to you're just like you're a more self-aware person. How could that not be a kinder and more vulnerable and more reliable person than other people have been?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Wami Time asks, what is your perspective of your past? Do you feel like it wasted away years of your life, or did the struggles and obstacles you overcame made you who you are today? I know we kind of answered that, but if you want to add anything.
I won't. So that's a big thing, is everything I've ever gone through in my past, I would never change. You know what I mean? Like, I guess a big thing is it goes back into like the whole living in the past thing. It's shaped me who it's my past has shaped me into who I've been. I mean, sure, there's incidences where I'm like, I really fucked up.
Yeah.
But if I'm focusing on that, like I'm not staying present. And the big thing is like, being like living in now for me is like the biggest thing, and
Yeah.
staying grateful for who I am. And the life experiences I have, every single experience I've had in the past has shaped me who I am today. And I don't know, like I live in like an attitude of gratitude, and I'm so grateful for everything I've had, the people I've met, the experiences I've had. I wouldn't necessarily change anything, because all of those, like I said, it goes back to like the emotional kind of like growth, is like those trials and hardships you go through, like that shapes you, and you grow from them. You may not necessarily see it at the time, but ultimately who you become or how you handle it determines who you become. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't change anything.
I love that. True Centurion Neil asks, have you I don't know if this will make sense to you. It doesn't necessarily make sense to me, but have you tried reaching out to a Salvation Army captain for support?
So Salvation Army, I used to speak on, because they do, so the thing is they have, I don't know if you're necessarily talking about this, but they have kind of like 12-step meetings through Salvation Army, I think. And
Oh, okay.
I used to go and speak on panels inside of rehabs and halfway houses or sober living stuff. So that is something that I've done in the past. I don't know if that's necessarily what they're talking about, but I maybe. But I mean, even that, you know what I mean? Like Salvation Army is like a great. Well, it's not. They have programs out there that help people, and I know a bunch of people who have used Salvation Army to get sober. So
Understood.
I hope that's what you're referring to. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Bliffle, I've heard that too. Okay. Tally Twitch says, what was the defining moment that made you rethink your path and finally pull out of the addiction spiral? Did something specific happen? You kind of mentioned this, but if you in any way want to elaborate.
Yeah, so the thing is, I don't think it was a specific event. It was more a chain of events. So like I said, originally when I was 23, like got sober, I'm laying on a bunk in jail, and in county jail. And I have like one of those like come to God moments, and I'm like, oh my God, like what is going on, Then it was like a bunch of kind of like moments that fall together. So
Got it.
when I moved back in with my mom when I was 23 for 6 months, I held on to like, I want to say like an ounce of blow and a bottle of pills, and I was just like my tolerance for drugs was so high that like I was almost to a point where I couldn't get high. And I was like, you know what, 6 months, like I'll just wait. And along the way, just from staying sober, like I don't believe that anyone gets sober immediately and their life becomes like roses and puppies right away. You know, it's one
Sure.
of those things you have to work for. So it was like, you
Right.
know, like or originally it was like 30 days. And I was like, ah, you know, 30 days, like I'm starting to notice like I'm feeling a little bit better. Then 60 days came by. I was like, you know, like maybe if I go a little bit longer. And then I was like, that's it. Like 6 months, there was like this chick I liked and she was out drinking. And I was like, okay, well, you know what? After 6 months, like I got this. Like, you know what? Nothing's going to stop
Oh.
me. But then what happened is I ended up like, I got some commitments around, I got some commitments in my 12-step program meetings. And at the time I was like, oh my God, I can't leave now because how is this meeting going to function if I'm not here? Which is
Mm.
kind of like a sick way to think about it. But in reality, it ended up helping me because it was like the meeting would have gone on regardless if I was there or not. But just the fact that I was given a sense of purpose somewhere kept me sticking around. And eventually it was it wasn't like a one thing. It was like a bunch of things that kept me coming back. But yeah, sense of purpose is huge,
Sense of purpose.
which I
Maddie Brown.
believe.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, 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 no. It was the next
Oh
question.
my
So no,
god. So
finish your thing.
that's the whole thing is like happiness is like I love reading. Like there's a bunch of like different things. I'm like a big fantasy nerd, but there's some self-help books I'll read. But one of the I can't remember what book it was, but it talked about happiness as a human, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your sense like obviously there's a difference between happiness and joy, you know what I mean?
Right.
Joy will be like things like sex, drugs, you know what I mean? Or just like I mean ice cream, whatever,
Sure.
but ultimately happiness like it explained comes from it was almost like three different purposes and it was like yourself, relationships and community purpose and it's kind of like what you draw from those three things kind of like ends up kind of like propelling you to happiness, which is absolutely insane to think about because yeah, like you think about like community and like who is it with you or you know who like what community are you a part of that is kind of like driving you. And a big thing is like if you don't have again for me I should say a big thing for me is like when I didn't have a community that 12-step community really is what drove me. And then your relationships, whether it's like excuse me, either friendships or intimate, like that's a huge thing too, you know? It's like this give and take thing, like you're constantly giving and taking. And then kind of like self-love was ended up being like the end purpose. But yeah, that sorry, just kind of
Don't be sorry. That was beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah. I think the book you're talking about is Mark Manson's book. Uh, fucked. No, that's the second one. Everything is fucked. A book about hope. The first one is How Not to Give a Shit. How Not to Give. I can't remember. Anyway, okay, moving on. But I think I've read what you're talking about. Maddie Brapp says, I had a relapse today. How do I forgive myself for it? Because it feels hopeless. I feel hopeless about the whole situation.
You know what? I don't think it's one of those things where it's like you don't beat yourself up over, you know what I mean? It's like as humans, like it's like one of those things. It's not about how hard you fall. It's more about what are you going to do to get back up and change things in the future. Like that was a big thing. Like when I saw Mixer shut down, I saw all the videos of, and this isn't like I'm not knocking anyone, but
No.
you know, there were people crying and they're like, my life is over. Like, what the fuck am I gonna do? And the reality is, like, that's life. You know what I mean? Like those hardships, like those bitter times make the sweeter times that much sweeter. So it's like you don't beat yourself. You don't you know it's I don't necessarily think it's about forgiving yourself. Now it's kind of like what action you're gonna take to move past that, like what are you going to do to make your life better? Because like a big thing with sobriety, everyone the when you first get sober, like I do believe time is such an important thing, you know what I mean? Because with time comes emotional growth and you could go back and look at it, but in my opinion, like I don't give a fuck about the days, you know what I mean? It's really what am I doing right now? What am I doing to better my life right now? Like what am I doing to give back to a community? What am I doing to instead of looking at myself like what can I get out of it, it's like what can I give back to make my life better in a sense, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
don't I would say like don't beat yourself up. Just what are you gonna do to be a better person tomorrow? Like today's or I guess not even tomorrow, but right now.
Yeah. Dude, I love that. That's amazing. Yeah. Don't try to be a good person, try to be a better person tomorrow. I love that. That's all of our time for tonight, and you're absolutely fantastic. I have to ask, do you have these chats like frequently in stream, or is your game like, or do you just focus on gaming? And like that's totally okay. I'm just
It
curious.
depends, right? I mean, we'll talk about drugs a lot, like once a week, and I know it triggers so many people because I'm like, I mean, I don't know, like I love like my room or my last roommate, like he would smoke weed. He was like this fucking like I don't want to say like religious pothead, but I mean he was like he loves smoking weed, and I love that
Sure.
people can go out and do drugs. You know what I mean? I mean, and I talk more about all I can talk about is my experiences. I actually only
Right.
talk about it. It'll come up in passing once a week,
Sure.
but I mean, yeah, I mean, if somebody's in there and struggling, like it's kind of like one of those things. Like, again, I can talk about my experiences, and that's really it. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
so it
thank you
doesn't
for
come up
talking
too
about it.
much is what I'm going. But I mean, I'll talk
No.
about it when it does come up.
Yeah, well, you were very readily available to talk to some rando blonde, small, very small. He's so
I
tall,
mean,
y'all. But yeah, you're very open to talk to this very small, blonde, blue-eyed girl that came up to you and was like, "I'm gonna interview you," and you were
yeah,
like, "Okay, sure." So, you're clearly readily open to have these discussions, and I don't think forcing them is the way to go about it. So I think you're fine. You're doing it right.
oh, thank you.
Yeah. He had me in tears back in October when he talked on stream. Yeah, so Resurrect, I guess when he does like talk about it, it's really impactful, huh? Great answer, man, said Manny Braps. You got an emotional cookie. Good job. So emotional cookies are what we give ourselves here when Pavlov's theory, like you ring the bell, you get a positive reinforcement, you're gonna do the thing again, right? So
Right,
the
right.
emotional cookie is what you give yourself when you are kind to yourself or you do something good for yourself. You kind of pretend to give yourself a cookie so that you can capture that moment and reinforce yourself doing good things to yourself. Yeah. So you
That's
got some
good.
emotional cookies from chat.
Thank you, chat.
All right, everybody. That was Trav Piper. I'm posting his links in chat, so please go check him out, Twitter and Twitch. He's a wonderful being. Trav, do you have any closing remarks that you want to, and you can have none. It's total no pressure, but.
I mean, I don't really have okay, so I guess a big one is I mean it's gonna be kind of lewd, but I mean some of the best advice I ever got, right? And I mean now it's kind of like everything goes for me now living in the present, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I try to stay focused on what's going on right now versus what's gonna happen,
Right.
you know, whatever. Because what happens is it's like expectations, and expectations will is also one of my biggest downfalls. So like I'll kind of leave it on this, but it was like expectations are a lot like masturbation. Like in the end, you're only fucking yourself.
That's amazing. All right, everybody. I will be right back. Have a wonderful, wonderful night. And don't forget to be the light. We'll be right back without Trav. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.